If I look at the phases of Hilltop, for me, there was an infant phase, which is when it first opened in 72, 73, whatever it was. And then when I stepped in, it started what I would call the growth phases. And that was really what I did, was to grow the school. And along the way, it's the people who make that happen. And I use Kevin as the perfect example. He said he wanted to do middle school. And we said, okay, write up a curriculum. How are you going to do it? And I said, I don't want anything to do with it. This is not my age group. And he presented this and build it and they will come. And I remember the night so well, and people just going, whoa, this sounds so great. So I think my phase was the growth phase. I mean, I look at the school today and say, look at all these Montessori trained teachers. We begged for Montessori trained teachers. We couldn't find them. And so the growth was the programs and then the buildings. So we moved from Center Church, and we were at Center Church and a little bit on High Street, and then we were on Center Church, High Street, moved to Austin, and then after my day to the new campus.
My phase was stability, and but stability that was completely wrapped in transition. Almost every minute of 8 years was spent transitioning in some way, shape, or form. When I look back on it, it's rather remarkable. And I was actually thinking about this because there were questions posed to me before this interview that said, think about this. So I did my homework. But I was transitioning, first of all, from a founding head of school who, as I like to joke, didn't just have big shoes. She had clown-sized shoes that I had to step into. Metaphorically, they were big shoes to fill, really. And the second thing is we transitioned, remarkably so, from little old Hilltop, in the basement of a school for the deaf to, being on the hilltop, and a home of our own, which was extraordinary. The thing that, though, I always remember when I became head of school in terms of transitioning, that was almost like my bumper sticker was, it became really apparent to me that Tonya had built this school, Tonya had founded this school, Tonya had nurtured this school, and now we needed to make sure that when Tonya left, or Kevin left, or Tamara leaves, that the school can survive us. And so the word sounds a little awkward, but that the school had to become more institutional by its very nature and its very structure, so that we didn't have to go through these monumental moments every time one of us decided to move on. So that was the other thing. There were two other sort of quick things that really occurred to me that were happening at the same time, not unique to my stage, but that were sort of more societal. And one was that schools were becoming a place where parents were now seeing them as the center of all life, their community, where they socialize, where they gather, where everything had to happen. And that was sort of you started to see the genesis of this, I started to see it. And that was really striking because it put a certain stress and demand on the school that we hadn't really experienced before. And the staff, everybody. And then the second thing that I realized happened, which is really important in the life of a school, and this started happening 30 years ago, but it by becoming head of school, and it was now my responsibility, and that was that the needs of students was changing radically. And I remember it starting 30 years ago and becoming more apparent to us. They needed more support. They had differing needs. Where did Montessori fit into that? How do we structure the school around that? How do we serve our population, our community? So it was, for me, it was a period of really from beginning to end of enormous transition where the goal was to stabilize the school on top of this foundation that Tonya had built. Top that.
I've seen my stage of Hilltop as being sort of furthering the sort of the dotting of the I's and the crossing of the T's is how I think of it sometimes, in that how can we still keep the community feel and the family feel, but also be compliant with all of the more extensive regulations that come into play, and have systems that are documented and have a clear process. So one example of that is how we've transitioned our financial aid program to index tuition, which Lauren Campbell was extremely instrumental in doing. And it's really been a way that we are very clear and transparent around how we work to make Hilltop accessible to a more broad economic diversity by allowing people to pay at different index tuition levels and have a system in place to do that. So there are several different areas where we've had to be more explicit and to a certain extent become a little more institutional in order to have things be transparent and equitable and understandable to the community. I've also am very grateful that I was not head of school when Kevin was, and there was that huge crisis transition up to be have the new facility and all that went into that crisis. I got to come in after that and do a lot of the fun things. There was a room all ready for the toddler program, but we didn't yet have the little toddlers, so I was able to bring that in. And there were plans for an arts barn, but we hadn't yet built that. So my first year there was when we built the arts barn. So I feel like I've gotten to do the fun sort of finishing up things to really have the school be able to be, to a certain extent, that community place that Kevin was referring to, which is something that we've actually recently started talking about in terms of the strategic plan, is how much do we work as a school to be that community center for our families? And where do we define our mission there so that we can really be meeting the needs of the families in many aspects of their life, not just the education of their children? And how can we also be serving a broader diversity of families and of students, both in terms of economic diversity, but also in terms of learning needs and other supports to wrap around the family. So actually another example of a fun thing I've been able to add was bringing a learning specialist on so that we can really meet the needs of different students that have different learning needs. And we've also just this year added a social emotional learning coordinator. So again, working to get at a broader diversity of students and being able to serve the community.
I want to add one thing about, in respect to Kevin, that I think is phenomenal. He had a background in real estate, and so when we first went up to that site, to Hilltop, it was like, oh yeah, this is it, we got to do it. But his vision and way of looking at the space, having been in Montessori as long as he'd been, I think created a facility that has been so adaptable and so complete, even during COVID, that it's just unbelievable. I look at that space and say, this is a genius design, and I really feel that Kevin helped make that happen, or not helped, made that happen, and took a lot of input from staff too. But just, it's a brilliant building for Montessori.
And I'll let Tamara, speak to this herself, but the interesting thing is she hasn't given herself credit for this yet, but she's helped usher us out of that perpetual sort of state of insecurity, financial insecurity, and need. And when you circle back around to the conversation about what were our phases, the phase that I personally, and this is something that I work with other schools about all the time, is I really think Tamara has led the school into a phase, a state of sustainability, and which is the end of the road. This is where you want to get to, and maturity, and that's all been under her watch, and I think being in the thick of every little thing every day, you don't necessarily see it, but on the outside, it's really apparent that that's the real gift right now, and that's the direction the school is headed in.